to be launching a tasty pastry. It's a low-carb Pop-Tart. It's got 3 to 4 grams of net carbs, and we love this show. This is our best place to be in LA.
Welcome back to Legendary Foods Muscle in the Morning. I'm Dave Palumbo, and today is Thursday, June 30th, 2022. And let's find out what's going on in the world of bodybuilding and fitness. 9 times out of 10, scale weight doesn't actually mean anything in bodybuilding because it only tells part of the story. And right now, 6 months out from the Olympia, the scale is telling us that Urs Kalecinski is trying to play Classic Physique's version of the size game. Last week, Urs released a video on his Instagram that showed him weighing in at almost 270 pounds, which seems like a huge number for a division that has a weight cap. But with that in mind, and that being said, the biggest story here might actually be his conditioning, because even though he's bigger and heavier than he was a few months ago when he won the Boston Pro, he still looks like he's keeping himself in great conditioning. After his win in Boston, there was a lot of talk from people in the industry who saw Urs as someone who could potentially take over the reins from Chris Bumstead one day. And if he keeps growing into the division like this, that day might not be as far off as we think. Now, I know that we started the last segment off by saying that the numbers on the scale usually don't mean anything in bodybuilding, but there is that one time out of 10 when they actually do. And we saw that on display last weekend at the Expo Super Show when Marcella deangelis failed to make the weight for his IFBB debut in Classic Physique. A few weeks ago, he told you that there was some uncertainty from his camp about whether or not he would even compete in this show because he got sick, he wasn't able to train, which caused his weight to drop significantly. And according to Marcella getting ready for this, that was actually the reason why he missed the cutoff. Marcelo came out with a statement last weekend that essentially said he missed the weight cap because some of the fluid he lost when he was sick was synovial fluid that was in his vertebrae, which caused him to measure shorter than he actually is, which is something he didn't account for when he was, factoring in the height and weight requirements for the division. I'm not a doctor, although I did go to medical school, and I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and I can honestly say that this is the first time I've ever heard about anything like this ever happening. But if he can figure out a way to fix, those spinal fluid hydration issues and do some vertebral growing between now and whenever the next show will be, then I guess we'll all finally get a chance to see if he is going to step in and be a potential title threat from day one in this division, or if he'll ultimately end up having to switch to the open class, where he won't have to worry about the height thing being an issue. If you're a Steve Kuclo fan and you've got your ears turned onto the rumor mill, then you're probably happy with what you've been hearing lately, because it's looking more and more like, there's a possibility that we might see the King Snake on stage at the IFBB Tampa Pro in a few weeks. We've known for a while that Steve was toying with that idea, competing again before the end of the summer. And the initial thought from most people was that we'd see him back on the Texas Pro stage, where he took second last year behind Iain Valliere. But lately there's been some buzz floating around about Steve, bumping up his timeline for a few weeks to potentially compete in Tampa, where you'd assume that he'd go in as one of the early favorites, even though it hasn't necessarily shown up in the win column. In the 2 times that we've seen him this year, Steve's been right on the money. And based on everything we're seeing, it looks like that would also be the case if he did decide to hop into Tampa. When he's dialed in, Steve is one of the best in the business, and that makes him a huge threat to bring home a win, regardless of who else is in the lineup. If you're a long-time loyal fan of this show, then you know how much we love a little bit of old-fashioned trash talk. And thankfully for us, it looks like we have our first mini beef of the season between Blessing Awodibu and Iain Valliere starting to catch fire. As far as we can tell, it looks like it all started about a week ago after some comments that Blessing made on a podcast directed towards Iain and a handful of other guys about, them watching their backs at the Olympia weekend because the boogeyman was coming for them, which seems harmless enough because this is what Blessing does. He's bodybuilding's ultimate hype man. But apparently Iain didn't find it quite as entertaining as everyone else did, because when he was asked about it during a Q&A with his fans, he gave a pretty pointed response and essentially said that he thought Blessing didn't believe a word that was coming out of his own mouth. Now, just like pretty much every other back and forth that we've seen over the last few years, there's essentially zero chance that this ever escalates to anything beyond a few meaningless comments. But that doesn't mean that it isn't fun to talk about it, because if, for one reason or another, this thing doesn't die down and it actually starts to grow legs, well, at the very least, it's going to make for an entertaining press conference during Olympia weekend, which is, well, something that I'm sure we all wouldn't mind watching play out. And that does it for yet another edition of Muscle in the Morning. I'm Dave Palumbo, reminding you to always be true to your passions, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.